Good evening, this is Brown at IF Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about Beta Test. Beta Test was a movie that I, much like my last movie I reviewed, Ghost Machine, I got on the cheap over at a movie trading company. In fact, I got it around the same time that I got Ghost Machine. But anyway, though, yeah, it was something that I've been wanting to see for some time now, and it was like $3 or $4, and I went ahead and got it. And it's something that, it made me think of a better version of Gamer in a way, the movie with Jared Butler. But at the same time, it's not quite what I'd call a good movie, but it was still worth watching though, because there were some cool things about it that I liked, that you don't see in a lot of other movies these days. I guess one way you could describe it is, let's see, if you're a fan of Spartacus, the cable TV series, or Arrow, the series on CW, then Manu Bennett, aka Crixus and Slade Wilson, ends up fighting Johnny Cage, aka Linden Ashby from Mortal Kombat, at the very end of the movie, which that in itself right there was definitely something that piqued my interest, because I was born in the 80s, raised in the 90s, and I saw the movie Mortal Kombat, with my dad and a couple other people. They had rented it from Blockbuster, and that was a pretty cool movie. If you're a kid and you saw that, especially, and I always remembered Johnny Cage in that movie was actually pretty cool. And so fast forward several years later, and just finding out that one, he's in this movie, and two, he's a bad guy. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's interesting. And then finding out that the protagonist is Manu Bennett, who I really grew to appreciate as an actor after having seen him in the TV show Arrow, because to me, that guy is Slade Wilson, aka Deathstroke. So Slade Wilson versus Johnny Cage. I mean, how can you go wrong with that? All right. So anyway, I guess I'll go ahead and get into the movie here. Sorry, just a little bit of a geek out there. But okay, so Beta Test tells the story. It's kind of sort of this near future setting, and there was this video game developer, a guy by the name of Max, played by the great Larenz Tate, who that guy's always gonna look young. Okay, the guy's like in his 40s or 50s right now, but he still looks like he's in his 20s or 30s. So good genetics. But anyway, though, he plays a video game developer named Max, who is agoraphobic. And basically, he's afraid to leave his house due to a traumatic event that happened to him. But he's a cutting edge video game developer and gamer, and he one day he gets an advanced copy of this game that's going to be all the rage. It's fully immersive, first person kind of game, I guess if you had to describe it. And he gets into it, and it looks like you're kind of your typical Grand Theft Auto game, except maybe with a little more detail to thrown in with the protagonist to make it look more like someone in the real world. But the thing is, he notices something that as he's playing his character, if his character does something in a game, something happens in the real world that sort of corresponds with what's going on in the game. And so pretty soon, Max finds out that the reason that all this is going on is because he's literally controlling someone. Like, he's using the controls, but it's controlling a real flesh and blood person who is going out and committing, crime, or, doing these missions that you're supposed to do in the game. And it turns out that not only is he controlling a real flesh and blood person, but Max is actually in control of a guy named Creed, who is played by Manu Bennett, who just happens to be the inventor, not of the game, but of this particular implant that it's put in a person's neck, and basically that enables them to be controlled by someone from afar. There's a sort of a conspiracy going on in which this corporation that's they're kind of like OCP and the RoboCop movies, that capitalist corporation that's got its hands in every single pie. On the surface, they're an organization that wants to do good for society, but behind the scenes they're like, hey, profits are all that matter. Trying to pass whatever bills you can to get our agendas enforced, no matter the cost, no matter who gets killed. The guy who's running this is a gentleman by the name of Kincaid, and he's played by Linden Ashby, and aka Johnny Cage from Mortal Kombat. And he's a very faux, affably evil, if you want to go by TV tropes, terminology. He puts on a good public persona, but he's a real sadistic SOB. And he, Creed had some objections to this particular implant and the way that the corporation was wanting to use it. And so Kincaid came up with this, sort of complex or convoluted scheme, if you want to get down to it, of having Creed, be the ultimate guinea pig, albeit unwilling, for not only this, device, this implant, but also as a participant in this video game that Max is playing. And so events eventually happen to where Max realizes what's going on, and he realizes, one, he's in control of a real person, and two, who it is he's in control of. And eventually he and Creed make contact with one another and try to come up with a plan to one, get Creed released from this the control of this implant. But also, as it turns out, Kincaid had also had some of his henchmen kidnapped Creed's wife, and it's basically he's holding her hostage and is forcing Creed to go along on these and perform these criminal acts. And once Max finds out what's going on, he also forces Max to go along, with Creed on these things, as far as controlling him, making him do these, acts of violence, and so Max and Creed, they eventually they make contact with one another, and they're able to try and come up with a plan, to fight back against the programming, and to where Creed can have some autonomy again, as well as being able to take the fight to the enemy, in this case Kincaid's corporation. And so so that's the synopsis there. And Beta Test, I thought, was an intriguing movie because like I said earlier, it made me think of a better version of the movie Gamer. It had Gerard Butler in it, and Gamer had some cool moments in terms of the concept, and it was a similar concept to Beta Test. So I guess you could say that if you want to be cynical about it, Beta Test is kind of ripping off Gamer, except Beta Test, I think, does more with the premise than Gamer did. Like Gamer had some moments, some good moments where you saw what they were going for, but the people who made the movie, it seemed like, were too focused on making the movie itself as gruesome and repulsive as possible. Like there was a lot of gross stuff in there, and dialogue that honestly didn't really need to be in there, or if it was going to be in there, they relied on it too much, and to a point where when I was watching Gamer, I just whenever stuff like that was going on, whenever they were relying too much on vulgarity and grotesqueness, to shock you, as opposed to say tell the story, it took me out of it. So Beta Test, on the other hand, it does have its problems, but I didn't have that problem that I had with Gamer. Beta Test, to me, it was a lower budgeted movie, but it made a better attempt at immersing you in the world of this movie is set in. And you saw, I guess, more possibilities of what they wanted to do and what they were going for. And I appreciated it in that respect. And I also I liked how Larenz Tate, like I said earlier, the guy's always going to look young. And so you're thinking, the guy's in his 40s or 50s, and he's playing like a hardcore gamer, but he sells the part pretty well, and he's plays a very affable guy who had a rather tragic, he had something tragic happen to him that sort of put him in a state where he's literally scared to leave the house. And so when things happen in the movie to where he's having to sort of, I guess, confront that fear, things are kind of interesting in that respect, because on one hand, he's just wanting to, I mean, the most interaction he has with the world or outside is when he plays like a game or something, and interacts with people online. But here he's realizing that his actions have consequences out in the real world in terms of what he's doing in the game. And so having him like have a little bit of an arc, I guess, I thought was pretty cool. And Manu Bennett, he did pretty good in the part too. I mean, granted, there's a bit of a fanboy in me who, just seeing, Manu Bennett, aka Slade Wilson, doing his thing, in a movie, it's always gonna, it was gonna look cool to me in that respect. But no, he actually did pretty good as far as acting goes, because it wasn't just like a one-note performance or anything like that. Not that he's that kind of actor. He's actually a pretty good actor, but he could just done an imitation of Slade Wilson or Crixus, just for this movie. But instead, he played a character who, he was a guy who had some possibly decent intentions for this device, this implant, but depending on who you're talking to, I mean, there's a lot of political stuff going on here. Some of it like more on the right-wing side of things, and but at the same time, he he's forced into a situation where he's not a man of violence, or at least that's how his character is portrayed, but he's having to become violent, one, because he's literally being controlled by someone else, and two, when things get to the point where he and where Creed and Max are working together, he's having to harness some of the killer instincts that he's acquired, to fight the henchmen that Kincaid has going after him. And so it was interesting, watching his transition from like unwilling participant to a willing participant of violence, but for, I guess you could say, a worthwhile reason, in the sense that he's trying to save his wife. And so And also, I thought he did a pretty good job as far as like physical performance goes, because the way he's moving, like it really does look like he's not in control of himself. Like he's sort of like, kind of like that, but like you could tell that you're watching the movie, you can tell that his character is not in control of his body, and there's some rather alarming moments where he's helpless to prevent a situation from going out of control. Or then there'll also be moments that are actually kind of funny, like there's a hostage situation where he's at a bank, and he's having to take out the bank robbers without being detected, and so he's on the ground crawling around, and he ends up in front of one of the hostages. I think she was like a bank teller or something. And so Max at this point, he's in control of Creed, but he doesn't know at this point what's going on. And he's just thinking, hey, he's playing a game. But he finds himself in front of this female bank teller. And so Max, while he's playing the game, he says something like, hello, gorgeous, because it's a pretty woman. And at the same time, Creed, who's sort of like frozen in place, just seems to randomly say, hello, gorgeous. And so the lady's like, what? Because it's a hostage situation, and there's a very good likelihood that people are going to die. So it's just little bits of humor like that, and just the way that Manu Bennett played Creed in that respect. Just the physical acting, as well as the way he played the character. And once he and Max get together, the two of them have a pretty good chemistry as well, as far as they're they sort of get to become friends, I guess, or at least allies in this bizarre situation. And so yeah, the two of them made some good central characters. And Linden Ashby, he okay, he did a pretty good job in this part. And once again, I feel like they took a cue from I feel like they took a cue from RoboCop, in the sense of you got the evil capitalist or corporation. I kind of like an OCP XP, but Linden Ashby plays Kincaid as almost like a Dick Jones XP, the character played by Ronnie Cox in RoboCop, arguably one of the main bad guy in the movie. But he plays him in such a way to where he's good in front of the cameras, like when he's giving an interview, he's selling his spiel or what have you. He's the kind of guy who, if he were a politician, he'd go around kissing babies for the camera, that kind of thing. But behind closed doors, he really doesn't care about anyone. And it's sort of a combination of he wants his agenda enforced, but at the same time, he doesn't care about who dies in order for the agenda to be enforced. And also, when he kidnapped Creed's wife, he had more of it seems like he had kind of an infatuation with her, and like a lot of characters in movies where the bad guy is falling for a person that they can't have. It's kind of like they mistake infatuation with love, and Kincaid, you kind of feel like is going through something like that. But eventually he just comes to accept the fact that hey, he just wanted this lady that he couldn't have because she was taken, and he doesn't love her. He just wants her as kind of property, I guess. But and he was kind of miffed at the fact that this you know, seemingly beneath him inventor, aka Creed, had this beautiful woman, and the two of them had something that he himself couldn't have. And so, he sort of like decided to kill two birds with one stone. He decided to take what he wanted while also taking out someone who was going to stand in his way in terms of what he wanted, as far as what the implant, what he wanted to accomplish. And so in Linden Ashby, I mean, it was so funny watching him playing this kind of bad guy, because I mean, there are moments where he has that sort of Johnny Cage endearingly smart borderline sleazy charm. But then, he would say or do something where you're like, oh, wow, you really are a bad guy. Like there are instances where, one minute he's talking to, Max, once Max figures out what's going on, like they're talking over like some, the headsets and what have you. And he puts Max in a situation where he has to decide, okay, which person do you want to have killed here? And he's having to do multiple choice of, oh my God, I literally have to decide someone's fate. And the way he plays it, it's just kind of like, yeah, this guy really gets off on, seeing people in fear and pain. Anyway, though, yeah, I mean, all three of those guys do a really good job in the movie. The action was pretty cool too, especially for a low budget kind of movie, because whenever there's like fight scene, you could tell that the people who put this movie together, they sort of went out of their way to find people who knew how to fight in the movie. And so even though that some of the other acting outside of these three isn't that good, whenever the action's going on, it's still pretty cool to get caught up and watch what's going on. And seeing Manu Bennett, who is naturally a gifted fighter, whenever he's in a combat situation in the movie, if you've seen him in Spartacus or Arrow, the guy is good whenever it comes to a fight scene. And it was just really cool seeing him do his thing. And once again, that physical acting also came into play, because there would be depending on if he was still under Max's control, or if it was more like towards the end where he has full control again. There's kind of an interesting difference between fighting styles. Like when he's under control, he's fighting like sort of stiff and almost robotic. But when he's got control again, his movements are more fluid and free. So I thought that was a nice little detail there. And also, a few nice touches are like when, say for instance, before Max finds out what's going on, whenever he's controlling Creed and having him fight someone in the game, like say for instance, he stabs someone in the skull in the game. Then the camera cuts to the real world, and you see Creed pulling the knife out of this opponent's brain or skull, and you see like brain and blood coming out. I was like, dang. So there's actually I mean there was some good work as far as, I guess, some editing and blood and gore and things like that. Because it's not an all-out gore fest or anything like that, but like when the violence happens and blood is spilled, it's kind of startling, and just because of the when they go from the game to reality. I thought that was kind of a nice touch. And so yeah, I mean, I thought it was pretty interesting in that respect. I do think though that, see, there are moments where I mean, Beta Test to me kind of worked on a basic B movie level, and it also there were moments where it seemed to kind of rise above, what it was, but it, kind of fell short of being a full-on good movie. A couple of the reasons, were like, whenever it came to the political agenda that the characters were talking about in the movie, Kincaid, whenever he's got his agenda that he's trying to enforce, with the implant, and then you got Creed who's, opposing it, because of the way it's going to be used, with, real soldiers. You kind of feel like that. I mean, there's a legitimate point that, the people of the movie were trying to make, say maybe from a political standpoint. But the problem is, I feel like, how sometimes you'll have someone who has the hint of an idea, but they don't quite know how to verbalize it. But unfortunately, they decide to go ahead and, get it out there anyway. Like they decide to say, I don't know, make a presentation about this hint of an idea that they have, but instead of having like a full-on functional idea, they have, say, just, bits and pieces of it. And so, this presentation, or speech or what have you, you're checking out, it's just kind of all over the place. And, you're thinking, well, I mean, there are moments where you feel like they might be onto something, but then again, they start contradicting themselves because they don't have a fully formed idea to work with. And that's kind of what I felt like with the political aspect of it, because, I mean, the movie kind of opens up with a really cool credits sequence in which, there's like, while the credits are going, you got all of this footage from, political conspiracies, stuff going on, or certain atrocities that have happened. So like it's one of the first things you see in the movie is footage from 9/11. You're thinking, whoa, this might be an intense movie here. And so, and don't get me wrong, there are some intense moments, but it's more like intense because of, the way the violence is, as opposed to, say, what the concepts are. And that's where I feel like it sort of fell short, because, the basic idea, was pretty cool and they did well enough with that. But when they tried to go beyond that with, the political ramifications, or they tried to, sell it to the audience, or say this is a serious thing, it doesn't really gel with, or at least it didn't gel with me, because, I was watching, the characters talk about this, the sort of like a pseudo-political, debate, and it just felt like neither one of them had a concrete idea, to go to work with. And so it just kind of took me out of it, if that makes any sense. And so another thing, that kind of holds the movie back is, some of the main three actors do a pretty good job, but some of the other actors, though, are, well, they could stand to take some acting classes. Like the woman who played Creed's wife. I mean, granted, she doesn't have a whole lot to do in the movie, but, the way she's, portrayed, it's almost like you got the idea that, hey, she's more known for her feminine assets as opposed to, say, acting ability. And so, we're supposed to be invested in Creed, saving the woman that he loves, but, they don't really seem to have that much chemistry whenever they're together, which isn't, to be fair, isn't that often, but still, it's like, if you want to, if Mario's going to rescue the princess, you want to see that, hey, these two actually have a connection, that kind of thing. But, Creed and his wife, they didn't really seem to have that much of a connection, probably more likely because, the woman playing Creed's wife, she just didn't really do much for me as far as acting goes. I mean, easy on the eyes, but not much in the way of chemistry. And there's another actor who, he's sort of like, I guess you could say, Creed's dragon or second in command of, the henchman, his enemy these evil forces, evil soldiers, and he it's almost like they got a porno version of Danny Trejo. I mean, I've heard him described as that in terms of how he looks, and yeah, that's kind of how I describe him as far as his looks and his acting ability, because he just it wouldn't have been a problem if he hadn't been given such a prominent role in the movie, but unfortunately he's one of the main supporting actors, and he's sort of whenever Creed's got a mission he has to do that Max ends up controlling him on, this guy pops up on like a viewing screen or whatever, or a computer or laptop, and taunts Creed with this is what you gotta do, man, and all this, and it just it really gets annoying with this guy, and whenever this guy is on the screen, you're like, okay, either they could have gotten someone who was a better actor, or they could have had the guy take some more lessons, or at the very least they could have reduced his screen time, because unfortunately, because of how much screen time he has, as well as how bad of an actor he is, it's really annoying whenever he pops up. And I mean, I guess the only good thing I could say about him is that when it comes to the fight scenes, like whenever he's fighting against Creed, I mean, at the very least, he seems to know how to, handle like a choreographed fight. But unfortunately, he's not a good actor. Yeah, and so granted, this being a B movie, I ain't going expecting like Oscar caliber, acting. But at the same time, it's just if it was too much focus on this guy who honestly wasn't a good actor. I mean, maybe he's a nice guy and probably a nice guy in real life, so nothing against him on a personal level. Just he needed more acting lessons. And I guess another thing that I kind of had an issue with was the fact that, okay, it's hard sometimes. You gotta give movies a little bit of leeway as far as logic goes. I mean, anytime you watch a movie, I mean, you want to give it some leeway, but at the same time, there has to be some logic within that movie, especially if they establish a certain set of rules. And there were some instances in which I felt like, from the sci-fi angle, they could have done better. Like whenever Max and Creed work together to get him deprogrammed, or at least out of this corporation's control, where he's able to move and fight on his own. I feel like in a way it made sense for them to get to that point, but at the same time though, it presented its own problems, like on a logical level, because, okay, so the character of Creed, while he is played by Manu Bennett, who's a naturally gifted fighter in real life, the character is not a fighter in the movie. Like, yes, he's being made to fight, but he's not supposed to be a fighter. Like, he's supposed to be like an inventor, a family man, that kind of thing. And so, what went in the scenes where he's fighting bad guys and he's under Max's control, on a logical level, it works, as far as the movie setup goes. But when he's out of Max's control, okay, semi-spoiler here, but there's a really cool scene, at the movie's climax, where he has to go through an army of bad guys. And Kincaid, he makes a point of telling everyone, to, don't use guns on him. I want to see, this done the old-fashioned way, fisticuffs, or whatever they can get their hands on, that kind of thing. And visually speaking, it's a really cool fight scene. And I remember reading that the director of the movie, they went on record to say that they wanted to try and, do a single shot, or a one long take I forgot the terminology, but it's like, I think it's called a long take, where it's like one continuous action shot for several minutes. And there was a movie called Old Boy where, they did a really acclaimed long take on a hallway, fight. And Old Boy, awesome movie. Check it out if you can. But also, it was an awesome fight. So they wanted to sort of one up it as far as, I guess, how long the fight was. And I gotta say, it was a pretty cool fight scene. And but the problem was that, and while it was awesome to look at, it was one of those moments where I guess maybe I'm just kind of at the point where, I mean, I could still enjoy it, but up here, I'm just thinking to myself, well, wait a sec, Creed, he's not actually a fighter, and yet suddenly he's got all these martial arts skills, and he's, fighting, like crazy. And it's more like he's fighting in the sense that of someone who knows how to fight, as opposed to, say, someone who's driven by desperation. And I think this wouldn't have been a problem if his character were still under Max's control at this point. But at this point, though, they make it clear that Max isn't controlling him. Like, he's got his own physical autonomy back. And I think that they could have, maybe softened the damage by having them say, maybe this being a B movie, a little bit of dialogue, could have, gone a long way to save, this situation. They could have said something like, maybe, because even though he's not under the control of the chip anymore, the chip, it basically took all the, combat maneuvers that, Max made him go through whenever he was under his control, and sort of embedded itself in his, head, to where maybe, his body, like on a, physical level, even though he himself didn't know how to fight, like whenever a combat situation would come up, maybe the implant had some residual, stuff in there that, would enable him to, call in on those instincts that, from when he was, fighting under Max's control. I don't know. I'm probably making it sound more complex than it is, but I mean, just a little bit of dialogue, they could have, explained, how and why Creed's able to put up the fight that he is on his own, without being under the control of the implant, because, I mean, heck, even if they'd said that, Creed had been like a specially trained, a special forces, soldier, or maybe had some special forces training along with being an inventor, I mean, that'd be a little hard to swallow, but at least it would have been something. But I just think that if they'd had it to where, say, Max was still controlling him at that point, him being a killing machine in this scene would have made a lot more sense, and would have been more easy to swallow on a purely logical level, as opposed to, say, it just looks cool, but if you're thinking about it, it's like, they doesn't quite work on a logical level. But I will say this, though, after he goes through all this, he ends up fighting Kincaid, and this is where you get, Slade Wilson fighting Johnny Cage in a sword fight. And it's really cool to see. So, and when that happens, I will give him credit. I mean, even though I have an issue with, him being able to be a one-man army, even though he's not a naturally trained fighter in the movie, I do appreciate the fact that by the time he actually gets to Kincaid, a bit of reality ensues. Like, he's literally just fought through an army by himself. And yes, he's been a one-man wrecking crew, but at the same time, he is exhausted. I mean, he's strained, he's injured. And so when he fights Kincaid, it's not the one-sided fight that a lot of action movies might have, decided to make the choice to do. It's actually kind of I'm not going to say it's an even contest in this, because I mean, Kincaid's kind of in his prime and, Creed's not at this point, just because he's gone through a gauntlet. But at the same time, though, it's more of there's an actual competition there. So you get a fight scene that looks cool, and there's a little bit of suspense in the sense of, the main character is, not at 100%. And so there's a little bit, of, okay, he might actually lose here. And so I thought that was, pretty cool. And like I said, it's Slade Wilson fighting Johnny Cage in a sword fight. Awesome stuff. And so I guess one other problem I had was that I don't want to say who the character was, but at the end of the movie, one of the characters, one of the good guys, they start to, towards the end of the movie, it's sort of hard to tell what they were trying to go for because on one hand, they seem to be going for the fact that, saying, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. This character, they end up saying in the same position as the bad guy was in, and in terms of running things, and they start exhibiting like the same mannerisms and dialogue as the bad guy did whenever like he was doing interviews and things like that. And it's hard to tell if they were implying, okay, this person's now in a position of power, but he's become just like the bad guy. Or on the other hand, though, there seems to be like a vague implication that this character, it was all part of their plan all along. And unfortunately, I feel like that was something that didn't quite work for me, because if they were going with the approach of this was part of their plan all along, there really wasn't any sort of development in the movie, that hinted at that. It just, so if they were trying to go with that, it just kind of came out of left field, as opposed to say something that, you go back and you watch and you're like, oh, wow, that's actually some good foreshadowing. But no, there wasn't really any foreshadowing. But on the other hand, though, if they were just going with the whole absolute power corrupts absolutely angle, that might have worked if they had maybe had this character struggle with some stuff, or debating something, and pertaining to power, or at some point during the movie. If they had done something like that, it would have been something like, okay, there's some foreshadowing, so when this character sort of becomes just like the bad guy towards the end at the end of the movie, it's just kind of like, oh yeah, so the guy was struggling with stuff like that, but he lost the struggle and he became just as bad as the bad guy. If they'd done something different like that, it would have worked, but instead it just came out of nowhere. And so I'm not going to say it ruined the movie, but at the same time, it was one of those moments where it's kind of like the whole movie itself. It you see what they were going for, but it just the execution and delivery keeps it from being, as say powerful as they could have been, or as it could have made it. But overall, though, I actually, I enjoyed Beta Test for what it was. It was, a decent B movie, and there were some moments that actually went above B movie territory. I mean, not to a point where it was a full-on good movie, but you had moments that stood out and made the movie more memorable than it probably would be otherwise. So I'm going to give Beta Test 3 out of 5 stars. It was a decent movie, not without its problems, but for $3 or $4, I mean, it was definitely worth watching. I would say I mean, just depending on your perspective. I mean, it's definitely worth a rental for sure. But you know, if you see it for $3 or $4, I mean, I'd say, you know, if you're into B movies, uh, it'd be a good purchase. If it's $3 or $4, any more than that, I'd be like, no. But definitely check it out though, because even though it's not entirely a success, I mean, it's one of those movies that you definitely can appreciate what it was going for. And in the moments of success it does have, you know, it makes it stand out some. Also, another thing I was going to mention just real quick is that the soundtrack, the music score of the movie was done by Julien-K. And my brother and I actually saw them in concert a while back. And so, you know, and they put on a good show. And I remember they played with you know, Ghost Feeder and Birthday Massacre. And you know, Birthday Massacre is one of my favorite bands. And so, you know, when I saw, and this was at Gas Monkey Bar and Grill, and you know, and that was my first time ever seeing Julien-K in concert. And you know, I kind of became, you know, a fan of theirs, you know, after that. So when I saw that they did the music for this movie, I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. So any Julien-K fans out there, another reason to check the movie out. But anyway, yeah. Thank you for taking the time to, you know, check out my review. You got any questions? Drop a line. Let me know. Y'all have a good night.